I'm also seeing cool things like document generation or DocGen, those kinds of tools where people are taking advantage of AI, and it's going to make all of our lives a lot easier. So we're definitely seeing that. We're at the forefront of it, and hopefully it makes all of us, which I can't say hopefully, I'm seeing it already, but making us all 10 times more efficient. Hello, everybody. I'm Matt. I'm the head of community at Lawtrades. If you don't know Lawtrades, we're a legal tech company that provides on-demand, flexible legal talent, attorneys, paralegals, legal operations professionals, which we're talking about today, and contract managers, on a flexible basis. I'm very, very, very excited to do this presentation, just because legal operations is the coolest thing. It is the future of law, I think. I think our fantastic co-speakers here will say the same thing. I can't do either of you justice. You guys are fantastic. So, Marie, do you want to start and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Marie Widmer. I currently work as the Senior Legal Operations Manager for the Systems and Data team at HubSpot. And then I also work with Charlotte at Level 7, focused on legal coaching and change management and transformation of legal teams.
And Charlotte?
Yes, hi everyone. Super happy to be here today. So I am Charlotte Smith, founder of Level 7 Legal. I'm a former lawyer and executive coach, and I work with lawyers and legal teams on the human aspect of transformation.
Stellar. We have a really cool presentation today. Normally I like to riff it, but honestly, this is much better, and probably a better it probably has my thoughts a little bit more concise than my crazy all over the place. So I think we'll begin. Again, this is the nuts and bolts of legal operations, leaders influencing change.
I'm assuming everyone can see the screen, right?
You're good.
Right. Okay, next slide.
I love the change. Marie, do you want to start?
Yeah, so our focus today is on change management, really honing in on why this kind of underappreciated or misunderstood topic is the biggest advantage to running an effective legal function, and often is underutilized by most legal teams and legal leaders. So today we're going to kind of hack into all the situations where change management applies and how to easily become an expert in change management.
Fantastic.
Yes. Okay, so just to kind of get us started, we're talking about the baseline of the industry, right? So we know change is here. I think everyone on this call has been experiencing a number of changes in the last couple of years. So there's new roles coming out, right? We've got the COO of legal. Legal operations teams have really become fully formed in the last couple of years. We're really starting to hone in on data-driven legal teams that are centered around KPIs, taking a more proactive instead of reactive approach. And then also tech forward. I don't know if you want to talk about that more, Matt, but we've got the rise of automated workflows, CLM, matter management, and client experience.
Absolutely. I'll say that I'm also seeing cool things like document generation or DocGen, those kinds of tools where people are taking advantage of AI, and it's going to make all of our lives a lot easier. So we're definitely seeing that. We're at the forefront of it, and hopefully it makes all of us, which I can't say hopefully, I'm seeing it already, but making us all 10 times more efficient. Now, I'll speak to this. We are seeing such a rise in legal tech. Before, when I was in private practice, I think the big thing and the only thing really was e-discovery. And Marie, I don't know if the same for you when you were in private practice in Charlotte, but that's what we saw. That was what was innovating in the market. And now we're seeing you're right, like CLM products that are making things so much easier. CLM products also with the AI component, where they're also identifying key provisions that would be helpful or that you've utilized in the past. Identifying termination dates, things that would, normally I would have to go through, take time, effort, and bill the client, or if I'm in-house, take time and bill no client. We're definitely seeing this growth, and we're seeing much more adoption of these tools. And it's stellar. I mean, over the next few years, we're just going to see more and more automation and greater tools to make all of our lives so much easier.
Exactly.
And I think one of the incredible things is with technology rolling out, what it really means is that teams are going to go through that process of change and more frequently. And so therefore it is incredibly important to have a strong change management strategy and process.
Oh, absolutely. I remember getting an e-discovery tool, I think it was Relativity or something of the sort. And I just remember everyone getting onto the e-discovery page, and it was literally the most difficult thing because there was no strategy. We're all just kind of like figuring it out on our own. And we'll get to that slide later, but it ended up being a failed implementation. So we'll keep going.
Yeah.
So why are teams investing in legal tech? Marie, do you want to take the slide?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we both could talk about this slide for all day.
Hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest drivers, right, is that legal teams are constantly forced to do more with less. They're seen as a cost center in corporate environments. And so they're not getting the same level of budget and headcount. So they really have to redefine the term scrappy and deliver the highest quality service with limited headcount and resources. And then as well, whether you're in a law firm or an in-house team, your customer and your stakeholders have increasing expectations when it comes to efficiency and convenience. We live in a world where you can get on your iPhone and order groceries and rent a car, and we're just used to everything on demand these days. And we're starting to expect it when it comes to professional services as well. So legal is kind of being very forced very quickly to adapt to changing customer expectations and demands.
Preach on that one in particular. It's the nature of the market. We are seeing, you're right, especially legal departments where you're getting an email or you're getting a Slack message and you're like, hey, I need this answer. I need to know. I mean, the bigger thing that I've personally been seeing is I need to know stats. I need to know outside counsel stats, how much they're spending on XYZ deal, things of that nature, which you're right. Folks want that on a moment's notice. And that's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a lot, especially coming from a state of the industry before where lawyers weren't really being put in a position where they were being questioned or being asked to necessarily present more detail about the behind the scenes of how they work. So it's definitely a big shift culturally and in terms of technology. Absolutely. Now, there's also increasing compliance and regulatory complexities. I mean, we could talk about privacy all day and how much that's impacted the legal profession and how we've had to start to really adapt, especially in terms of audits, M&A, stuff like that. And then just pressure to scale, right? When you go to work in-house in a company, you're going to experience the pressure that the company's facing in terms of scaling quickly, growth, revenue. And those are not something that outside of a corporate environment that you may have necessarily experienced on that level. So I think it definitely changes the way you have to work.
Absolutely. Good at that. Sorry, frog in my throat.
Okay.
So this is probably my favorite slide for the worst reason. So 77% of lawyers have experienced a failed legal tech implementation. We've already received a question about the one I just referenced, and I will speak to that very quickly. And the fact of the matter is there was no strategy, and certain folks were utilizing the tool. Some folks didn't know how to use the tool. There was no formal training for the tool. Honestly, not a lot of buy-in from the actual staff and the attorneys, maybe management actually. So it's more or less a flip of what you normally see, where as opposed to asking management for the tool, management's trying to get everyone to use the tool. And at the end of the day, people said, well, it's easier for me to go on Adobe and just slide through the documents as opposed to utilizing one of these tools where I can tag documents, put them into separate folders, and ultimately make and preserving metadata and making things significantly easier. So lack of strategy, and that's probably what you see more than anything. That's what we're going to be talking about, but it's always going to be lack of strategy and buy-in from your team members, well, and management as well. So I hope I answered that question for whoever just asked it.
Okay. Let me see okay.
There we go. 90% of legal professionals are frustrated by tech implementation. I think we could all speak to this one.
Oh,
Marie,
yeah.
I think so. Charlotte.
Yeah, I hear it every day.
It's hard.
It is. I mean, as a recovering attorney, I didn't even use Slack. I wasn't even familiar with Slack, which is like, for all of us, is probably the most basic of tech. Or Notion, a project management, but a tool like Notion. And I think everyone from Lawtrades watching this is probably laughing as well, because it's just so true. And I don't know if it's a product of being legal professionals, or we think, at least lawyers, we just think law. We just think implementing the law, not implementing all these tools that things make easier. I think maybe it's a product of law school and how we were taught to or trained to be lawyers, but frustrates everybody. Frustrates the lawyers because they're not, they don't know how to use it. It's frustrating everybody else because the lawyers aren't using it.
Yeah, it's definitely it's an everyone problem. Usually what I've seen happen is that the tool will be quickly adopted by the people who are taking on more administrative burden on the teams.
Yeah.
And then what happens is it's like when you're that person in the office and people find out that you know how to unjam the printer, and then all of a sudden you're the only one that gets called when the printer breaks. Yeah, there's that kind of like, no good deed goes unpunished when it comes to excelling at legal tech. But it is hard, because legal tech is nuanced. It requires stages of implementation. It's complicated, it's ever changing, and it kind of goes against the way that maybe people were originally used to working, which is that you figure out the answer and then you can kind of repeat that methodology over and over again. Whereas tech, no matter how many times you learn it, there's something that's going to change. It's going to have an update. It's going to have a new development. So that can be a little frustrating.
Yeah. And to just kind of like layer on to that, it's there are a lot of people. I feel like it's time. Time is one of the most important aspects that lawyers just don't have.
Yeah.
When it comes to utilizing the tool. And so if time is not built effectively into some kind of training and enablement program, then we get frustrated legal professionals. And so it's a tough challenge to crack.
That is a really fair point, because especially in a law firm, you can't bill for that time to learn these tools. And when you're in-house, it's not necessarily billing, but Marie, to the prior slide, to your point, there's a pressure to be instantaneous with these answers. Okay. And if I'm trying to utilize Notion to make sure there's more transparency in what I'm doing, right? I'm trying to implement whatever my workflow is through Notion, and I'm working on that. And then on the other side of it, someone is pinging me on Slack saying, "Hey, Matt, how much is our spend here?" Or "What's it looking like here? When will these contracts get executed?" And to Charlotte, to your point, it's just, I don't have time to do all those things. I only have time to do that. So it really is which we'll speak about, is definitely a time management, as well as having the strategy of how this is going to be implemented.
Yeah, making sure that the ROI is felt immediately. And maybe not all of it, but you need to show people the positive impact the minute they start using the tool. Otherwise, they're gonna tend to feel frustration, right? Because they're taking more time out of their day to do something that isn't necessarily providing them any benefit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good segue.
Stories. I have so many stories personally. I'm thankful that no one from my prior life as a private practice attorney or an in-house attorney is on this call so they can hear about it. But there are plenty of things, not even just tools, just general operational aspects of the practice that were not implemented properly. Like, for example, I utilized, I'm sure you both have a familiarity with it, billing guidelines for outside counsel. I think that's my favorite example. And I know they make sense. And I time was a big issue, drafting the guidelines, which again, that's taking away from time from doing all these other things. And once they're drafted, trying to implement that with all of the outside counsel, making sure that all the other folks that are touch points with counsel are making sure that the guidelines are being adhered to, billing, making sure that billing knows that certain things cannot be billed for, certain things have to go through certain kinds of, maybe through Simply Legal or certain kinds of vendors. And it wasn't implemented properly. There was not I keep going back to this, which we're going to speak about even more, but there was not a strategy in place, as I talk about it out loud, to make sure that those things were handled. And there also wasn't a strategy in place to make sure that folks knew it was important. Folks knew that this is a big deal because, and I think, Marie, you have stories like this as well, where if this is utilized, we are going to save a lot of money. And that savings is going to be felt, and the legal isn't going to be just seen as a cost center. They're also going to be seen as a cost cutter, and making sure that especially in this market, I mean, that's crucial. So that's a horror story that I have. If either of you have anything, I'm sure.
Yeah, I feel definitely, I relate to you on that. I think you can sell people on an idea, but then when it's put into practice, the people that you thought you had on your side can very quickly become your biggest impediment, and because of change management issues. So with e-billing or anything, right? Like if you sell people on the idea of savings and compliance with our guidelines, but then they start getting angry emails from outside counsel, how could you do this to me? I've never been disrespected the way that you did by rejecting my invoice. Then all of a sudden, you've got your internal stakeholders coming back to you and saying, your program is terrible. I don't want to do this. And justifiably, no one wants to get an angry email. And then it kind of goes that way with CLM, right? If people are already struggling with bandwidth, negotiating the quarterly, bucket of contracts they have, and now they also have to navigate this new system and approvals and rules, and kind of also teach the customers the rules as well, because maybe you didn't do the best job providing enablement. Not going to be your best friends after that. And I've been in situations where I felt like 80% of everything was going right, but it only takes a 5% mistake for the whole thing to fall off the tracks. And once it's off the tracks, it's like, you're just kind of watching. It's a little hard to pull it back. So I think it is a ton of lead time prep, thinking about doing the lawyer thing, thinking about all the things that could go wrong and accounting for that in your planning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting because looking at all the kind of responses that we heard from you when we asked you to submit them, it was kind of common issues like struggling to get buy-in. Either at exec level or for your users. Poor user adoption was one of the biggest challenges. And ROI was another major one, which was even after you've implemented it, how do you show your leadership that you're actually having an impact in terms of hours reduced or cost saved or user experience improvement? How do you actually quantify that on paper?
It's the hardest job ever to prove value as you're watching this, I'm sure, and everyone on this panel knows proving value as legal is the hardest thing. That's why good legal operations in place can show that. I think there's plenty of CLM products, for example, that'll tell you how long it takes for a contract to get completed. And if you're using less outside counsel and you're using more internal counsel, and all of a sudden contracts are closing faster, you could show that timestamp. You say, hey, look, this is, or, I think some also have graphs and show like how many contracts were handled internally, how fast it was handled, effectively if there was any hiccups in the way. So, I mean, that's how you show value. I couldn't show value before because I didn't have proper legal operations tools in place. So I agree. The ROI issue is definitely one I think everyone across legal understands.
Exactly. And having a diverse team, I think one of the biggest assets that legal ops has brought to legal departments is that you're bringing in people with different backgrounds who didn't come necessarily from a legal education background. Because I certainly, even right now in my job, I don't have any data. I didn't learn anything in law school about how to tell a story with data or how to extract data. But I have someone on my team now who is an absolute wizard with data, and it's incredible awesome what she can do. But you can learn, but it takes a long time. So I think one of the benefits that we have now is diverse legal ops teams are really allowing legal to kind of shine like the rest of the departments in the company.
Reach.
Okay. So Charlotte, kick us off.
Yeah. So, everything that we just talked about in the stories, we can see patterns. We can analyze the data there. And what we want are legal teams that are cohesive, where there is collaboration, where there is strong culture. But when we have tech breakdowns, we can identify like where they happen, but feelings are created. And so we get teams that are feeling, maybe it's that sense of like demotivation, apathy, that sense of being frustrated, being overwhelmed, and burning out. And so it's interesting because when the team's energy goes to that place, how do we fix that? How do we shift it back into that motivated place where people feel inspired, people feel, excited to be using the tools, excited to be collaborating with one another? And so really that is what we are seeking to do, kind of moving from place the frustration to everything is working smoothly and as it should. And that really is the power of having a great change management strategy, building in time, and the training and enablement to allow that to happen. So let's look at the common causes. The buy-in issues. Why are we struggling with buy-in? Well, perhaps there's an issue around what the vision is, how you have communicated that vision to the team. Has it effectively been broken out into mission statements? Does everyone know, what they're doing, what the goal is, what the mission is, and how clearly has that been communicated? The training enablement part, I think that's huge, and then really building out roadmaps, KPIs, and just making sure that everyone knows where they're going. And so we on this slide, really what I've tried to convey here is like where we have a lack of vision and mission, these are the feelings that happen and these are the consequences. So like it's all linked, like the action creates feelings, and then here's the outcome and result.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay. So how do we overcome these challenges? I mean, that's the $1 million question, right?
We're going to solve it all in one webinar.
Wow. In an hour?
hold on to your seats, everyone.
Is this recorded?
So
yeah, good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So as you said, Charlotte, like we know that the consequences that the investment that you put in on the front end leads to feelings and then leads to consequences. So I think, do you want to talk to us about how that directly impacts the purchase of legal tech?
I think that's a you
slide. Yeah, I mean, I've bought. I mean, Matt can join me on this one. I've bought a lot of legal tech. Some wildly successful and some very wildly unsuccessful. But we won't talk about that. No, I'm kidding. I'm happy to share the horror stories, but buying legal tech is really about mastering the RFP. That is the time that you're purchasing legal tech is the same time that you need to be planning all of the change management. When you're buying, you need to know how you're going to gain user adoption, prove the ROI. It's not just about, I'm going to get buy-in, purchase the tool, and then I'll figure it out afterwards. You need to have all three solved at the beginning. And I think understanding the RFP is really broken down into three categories, which is, why do you need to buy tech? A lot of people rush to buy tech either because they got pressured by kind of the FOMO, you have other people on different teams that are talking about how amazing their life is. Secret here is it's like Instagram, it's all a lie. But really thinking about, do you actually need to buy tech, or is it something that maybe some manual process could clean it up first before you make that decision? And then also think about, what is the cost of buying tech? And when I say cost, I don't just mean the actual dollar amount on the contract. I mean, what is that going to take you in terms of timeline, resources? What kind of burden is that going to place on stakeholders? So are you going to have to leverage engineering resources in your company? Are you going to have to get a headcount to help you with intake into a tool such as CLM? Who's going to build your repository? Do you have time to put in the manual hours? So there's a lot of different layers to the idea of what tech is going to cost you. And then you have to weigh that out against, what do you expect implementing tech will achieve? So if tech is going to cost you all these things, is the ROI on it enough to justify the expense right now? Or are you perhaps at a stage in your company where you're just too small to make that decision? Or is your team too new and too fragile? Or do you guys not have enough budget or headcount to withstand kind of the burden of tech implementation?
I have nothing to add. That is exactly what I would say. I literally have nothing to add. That's usually the only thing I probably will say is that's probably one of the biggest questions I ask vendors is, how do I implement this as the fastest way possible? Fastest way possible, simplest way possible. Mm-hmm. And oh, sorry, continue, Charlotte.
Oh, no, go.
All I was going to, you go first. I'm less important, to be honest with you.
Well, I was going to say, like, to add the human sprinkle to this, it's asking as well your users, like, what is going to help them? What do they need? Like, what are their kind of learning experiences? And just really getting to know
that is so true.
their needs.
And I made that mistake early in my legal ops career, is I rolled out a solution based on what I thought people wanted and what I thought my team would benefit from. And then I did, and then I realized they don't want the same things. They're not excited by the same things I want. They don't need the same things I want. They didn't care about my dream. And that was, like, of course, shattering. So yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's definitely one that you have to think about, is like, are you actually providing a benefit to your users, or are you just like, are you thinking about what you would be interested in?
That's a really good point. That is a really good point, because if no one's using it, what was the point of buying the tech? So I always ask, how quick can I implement this? And effectively, like, what are the roadblocks? What would be the actual roadblocks? And if someone could be straight up with me and say, look, this is what it's going to take to get to this point. These are, to your point, Maria, these are the people you may need to implement this. You may need another FTE just to manage it. And it definitely helps with the decision. It definitely helps if it's an easier implementation, because then I can quickly go to talking about buy-in, going to my leadership and say, hey, this will take no time. This will take no time. It's a very low cost implementation. We can do it. And that certainly helps with buy-in and getting those tools. But that's one of my first questions I ask is, how quickly can I do this? And how fast, or not how fast, but like, what are the roadblocks? What stops me from doing this today? So anything else I say, I'm stepping over your toes. I think I agree with you both.
No, definitely not stepping on toes. This is my favorite slide of the whole presentation, which is like, obviously, we're here to tell you what you should be doing in RFP, but I'm sure many of you sitting on this call have probably already bought a tool. It's just an inevitable part of our industry right now. Our vendors are very, flirtatious, and they know how to do their job. So this slide is of course the, oh shit, I already bought it slide. So what happens if you're tuned into this webinar and you're sitting there going, you guys are not helping me because mistakes have already been made? So Matt, do you want to walk them through kind of how to save themselves?
Acknowledge and validate customer experiences. You have to, oh my gosh, I've been here so many times. I'll say this, like, you have to acknowledge that, like, this is the problem. Like, I've had it where I kept lying to myself and saying, like, it's still going to keep working. We're still going to get through. I think it's almost like a slow burn. And I have to stop and say, this is the problem. This is the problem I'm facing. To kind of reach your point, like, no one else wanted this product, or no one can use it. No one wants to use it. It doesn't help anybody. So validating those experiences, validating the frustration there. Do you want to take reinvest?
Yeah. So, definitely like you said, Matt, you have to be willing to acknowledge not necessarily failure, but maybe misaligned intentions. And then thinking about reinvesting in your foundation, you got to go back to square one and think about kind of if you skipped the phase where, for example, like if I'm buying a CLM and I'm working on I was working on a small startup at Dapper Labs, and we had a G drive that wasn't organized. People were negotiating out of email inboxes. We had really no ticketing or intake methodology, except for we had like a kind of a rough ticketing tool, and we decided to launch directly into a CLM with a very lean team. In hindsight, probably fixing some of the manual foundation would have sufficed and created less change management issues. So thinking about should you just start putting things in the G drive in an organized manner, building out naming algorithms, really refining your intake and ticketing? You can use the most basic ticketing tool to start ground one for CLM, contract intake, and then, kind of organizing your approval methodologies and documenting all the processes. If you go back and do that, that will reveal to you the reasons why you should not have bought that CLM or the things that you need to do to fix it. So just go back to square one, start thinking about the baby steps that you can take, and that will reveal to you maybe why the end state didn't work the way that it should have.
Yeah. And I think with all of this as well, it's again, layering on that human leadership approach with acknowledging and validating everyone's experience, reinvesting in your team and their energy, because maybe it's going to be disappointing to have a failed tech implementation. So how do we reignite that energy so people feel motivated and not disheartened, going into the future, so that you can do that next version, that next step?
I've done a postmortem where we look at it and we all have a really big meeting about it. We're like, all right, what did we learn? Because it's not to everyone's point, it's to not have everyone frustrated with what happened. We turn it into a learning experience. We learned a lot from this. We did. Now we're going to make things even better. We didn't need this. Reach your point. I've had the same thing with the G drive where things were disorganized and a ticketing system. I ended up utilizing Monday.com for a ticketing system, using that to create a little ticketing system. And that did alleviate a lot of issues that we had. Very similar, funny enough. And it took, you're right, figuring out maybe certain things we didn't need or that did look really appealing at the time. And everyone sitting down and not getting frustrated, learning from the experience, and overall pushing forward a better path. So we ended up, working with a better ticketing system, and then eventually implementing a better process. That's all that needed to be done.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said in kind of leading by example on your team and showing that it is okay to be imperfect, and it's okay to iterate, and it's okay to go back and say, hey, this wasn't the best the first time, but we're going to work together to make it even better. There's something about that process that has its own benefit. It'll create a stronger bond on your team if you do it the right way. So sometimes a mistake can end up being a better thing, versus forcing your team to stick with a tool that they don't like just because you already made the decision. You're afraid of looking, many of us in the legal profession have issues with perfectionism. So I get it. It's very hard to go back and say, oh, maybe not my best choice, but the more you do it, the more you'll realize that people respect you more for it.
I couldn't agree more. I will say, oh shit, to everyone and say, oh shit, I messed this one up, guys. I'm sorry about that. And you're right. The human element for especially legal professionals that we always seem robotic at times. You're right. It really does create another layer of relationship between the departments, and getting that you're right. It's like an added bonus where you get that extra buy-in of trust, which we're always trying to do. We're always trying to build upon inside of a corporate environment. So I couldn't agree more. Definitely echoing those points.
Okay. Well, this leads us down the rabbit hole over to the common denominator, which Charlotte can.
Yeah. So as we have got to in this webinar, really what we see is the common denominator when it comes to tech breakdowns, the common denominator in terms of like, as we're looking to the future, what is ahead this year, it's going to be change. Change is inevitable. And so it is crucial for us as leaders to work on being effective at change management. And, you know, all teams are going to be experiencing this common pain point as we look to the next 12 months and beyond. And so yeah, mastering this is what we are here for. So what is change management? If we go to the next slide, what we do is we're identifying, firstly, that change needs to happen. So it's bringing that attention, consciousness to the fact that, okay, we've got a breakdown, there's an issue, there's a challenge. We identify what is going on. It is utilizing processes and technology to enact change. So we are, you know, in this phase, developing our strategy and process to affect change. And then it is investing in our people. It's investing in culture, communication, collaboration, enablement, and to ensure that, you know, the change that we are affecting is successful. So we can break it down into those three areas.
I love these bullet points.
And yeah, so again, we've just made a model here really about how to affect change sustainably.
Exactly. And that ties into identifying the need for change and gaining buy-in, or kind of, I almost consider those to live in the same step. But really knowing whether change is necessary or not, and then knowing who to go to get, you know, kind of maybe approval or excitement gathered around the idea of the change, then deciding what you actually need to implement the change. Is it as simple as documenting a process, or do you need to invest more in technology or additional headcount, or what do you need to do to actually make it happen? And then thinking about, as Charlotte pointed out in the last slide, affecting change sustainably. So investing in culture and communication and workshops and everything that's necessary to make your people successful and happy.
Absolutely.
And it's cyclical. It requires constant investment. You are, you know, consistently going through this process and this cycle. It isn't, you know, I always like to kind of use the phrase, there is no silver bullet. So it's having the mindset that this is the process that you are going round and constantly kind of iterating for.
It's kind of the beauty of in-house work, but it's also the part that I guess, coming from a traditional legal background, freaked me out at first. Is it is true, like by the time you finish step 4, you already have to start again on number 1. Yep. Which is like, thinking about that is mind-boggling sometimes. It's like, oh God. But then at the same time, you're like, okay, well, I know I have a job then. So
security. All right.
Yeah, so it's exciting. I think we need to, and part of why we're doing this webinar, right, is to get people more excited about that idea, is that, like, no matter what you do the first go around, there's an opportunity to start a second. You know, there's always going to be another match. It's you know, you're playing a whole season. You're not just playing one game. So,
yeah, and I think that allows us to kind of layer on the mindset of like perfectionism, and sometimes, you know, we have this desire to get things right first time and be perfect, but actually the reality is that, yeah,
it's never going to be perfect.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, of course. It'll never be perfect. Just to harp on that, like, and I think that creates, I think we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the gosh, what do we call it? Like almost like shock, like paralysis shock, like where you think that you need to be perfect, so you don't implement a certain tool, you don't move in a certain direction because you think, well, there could be others, right? I see that also with because like CLM is a perfect example. There are so many CLM products that you feel like I want to find the perfect one, the one that fits perfectly for my department. And there are so many, so but you don't know what to do. I always thought as a legal professional, things need to be perfect. It needs to be implemented correctly. Things need to move smoothly. It'll never be perfect. It'll never be perfect. You can get close, and then you do trainings and you do updates. You make sure that everyone is aware of the product, is happy with the product. But again, it'll never be perfect. It'll never be perfect. So I've seen that firsthand, where I've seen frustration. But it's being frustrated with yourself, right? You're like, oh well, I don't think there always things can be tweaked, always things can be different, but you have to get rid of that for this to make complete sense. You're creating efficiencies. It's not going to be perfect efficiencies. They will still be efficiencies.
And you make a very interesting point around, like, you know, people struggle sometimes when they get into that frustrated state with decision paralysis.
Yep.
And then that's a very kind of low energy state of being, like when you're stuck, you know, we looked at the slide where it's like the stuck, frustrated, outcome, like no one's motivated to be able to do this. So how do we like shift that?
Absolutely.
And really this is what this does.
Agreed.
Yeah. So the must-haves, the must-haves when it comes to change management. Number one, I really believe it's that leadership. Being clear on what your vision is, and really having that written down, having it in a central place. Like, do you have a team notion so that everyone knows what the vision is? And as that vision, you know, iterates, which it inevitably will, you know, we want to keep up with that. It's facilitating environments on teams where there is that sense of trust, that sense of psychological safety. There's the communication there. It's okay to make mistakes. You know, we've got a no blame culture when things inevitably go wrong. So all of that kind of falls into, you know, the leadership category. And when you are strong in those areas, then getting the buy-in, it flows much more, you know, easily, because you are able to kind of motivate and engage people. People understand what they are working towards. So then the next part of this is energy management. So as a leader, you can be conscious of like the energy on your team. So how is everyone feeling? Like, what's going on in the world? What outside factors are impacting the energy of your team? Like, take, for example, you know, the earthquake in Turkey. I've spoken to leaders this last week, like members of their team directly impacted by that. Being conscious of that and being able to show up in leadership, you don't need to work today. You know, take some time off, be with your family. That serves to building like the energy of the team. So I think that's incredibly important. It's important to be conscious of your own energy and how you are feeling. This is where like the well-being aspect comes in, and burnout. Like, are you giving yourself what you need to be able to show up as the best possible version of yourself? Because when you're able to do that, that has a ripple effect as well. So it's very interesting how these kind of mindset layers or intangible layers like interact with, you know, the nuts and bolts of like, how do we like perfect the RFP, etc. And then the third aspect is time. And time is so difficult, but it's if you want to affect change effectively, it's going to take time. That is a reality. So we're thinking about priorities. What are your priorities? If this is a priority, we're going to have to make time. and that, you know, is an art in itself. It's something that is very difficult to do, but making sure that we have the right amount of time for people to feel supported and you know, to have support in being able to roll out tools, etc., is huge. So
Absolutely, especially the time. I see that a rushed implementation, or like people start to get frantic because you're like, and it kind of goes back to what we said earlier, where it's things need to move fast. I want answers fast. I want things moving fast. Do more with less as well. So fast, and you know, you're not really, you know, you're just constantly moving. I think is the best way to put it. I think I'm going in circles a bit. And providing that amount of time and support is crucial, because otherwise, if you have someone frantically trying to utilize a tool, implement a tool, it's going to inevitably fail, or they're going to get frustrated. We go back to earlier what we've talked about, and then they're going to fail because they're frustrated. It's almost like you have blinders on. You're not really even doing what you're supposed to be doing because you're like, I just have to get this done. This is not moving fast enough. It's not doing whatever it needs to be done. So that also goes to leadership, to your first point, but I've seen it myself and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you are in the state of being that you just kind of described, that like stress response, like, you know, everyone wants a piece of me, and, you know, everything is required yesterday.
Yep.
You know, let's look at performance science. Let's look at sports science. Do you provide like the best solutions, responses when you're like that? And the science actually shows no. And so it is important to make this a priority. And you know, there's the saying, sometimes we have to slow down to speed up. And yes, there are deadlines, and you know, that is a reality and nature of our work. But also, you know, boundaries is a huge so sometimes you know, you might have to reevaluate what the deadlines are, and so on. So
absolutely.
I agree. I like that you also called out personal branding in here as well. And I think that that's been really relevant to me during tech implementations, because a lot of legal teams tend to just get to work and not invest time in going around to their cross-functional stakeholders and kind of saying, this is who I am, this is my superpower, this is what my team is here to do to help you. And a lot of times when you implement legal tech, whether it's CLM or e-billing or ticketing, you are impacting other departments. So it is important that you learn how to communicate your value and your needs to different departments in the company. And personal branding isn't just, you know, having a good LinkedIn profile. It's really understanding how to kind of elevator pitch yourself to everyone, whether it's the people you work with or the people that you're networking with.
Agreed. It goes back. It's like sales. It's almost sales at some level, because for folks to understand the ROI, they need to have trust in you. They need to understand that you're in this position. And like, as a lawyer, I see this myself as an in-house lawyer. People need to look at you and be like, Matt understands the problems. Matt understands my frustrations. Matt understands the market as well. I see he's both visible externally and internally, and he understands the market. So I trust what Matt is saying here, that we need, right? E-billing is a good example. We need an e-billing system. We need some sort of e-billing tool. And I couldn't agree with you more, Marie. It pays dividends in the end.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Charlotte, do you want to kick us off on this? Yeah.
I mean, this is the, you know, promised land. this is where we want to go, to the space of the 3 C's, and the impact of getting this right, the impact of investing in this. It creates cooperation, it creates cohesiveness, and it creates, you know, a really positive culture, a culture that you know, people want to be part of. And you know, isn't that the world that we want to exist in? And we want for, you know, other legal professionals, like, to be able to come to work and be in a cooperative, cohesive work environment where there is that really positive culture. And so yeah, for me, this is kind of fundamental, and this is where we can get to. but it requires time, investment, and no silver bullets. But yeah, it's possible. It exists.
I always think of sports when I see the 3 C's, because it's really like, you know, that feeling when your favorite sports team, they're anticipating each others moves. They're looking for each other before decisions are made. And the ball gets passed properly and goals are getting scored. And you can just feel that energy when the team is there working with each other versus the seasons where they're just like all over the place and can't make the connections. And it also impacts, you know, the fan base, right? When the team is cohesive and cooperative and they're all connected and they're vibing well with their coach, you can feel that energy throughout the club and throughout the audience. And so it's kind of like that in an in-house environment when you guys have each other's backs and you can quickly make decisions without questioning each other or feeling any sort of resentment or jealousy or fear. The other people that are working with you will feel that, and that energy will carry over into how they treat you. Whereas if you're giving off signs of, you know, reading bad intention into things or hesitancy or fear, people will not want to work with you because they can feel that coming off of you. And it does translate into performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, look, our faces.
So yeah, we were gonna talk.
I guess we can kind of talk about, Charlotte and I can kind of talk about, well, how did we even get to creating this content or doing this webinar? Kind of what was the turning point for us personally in terms of realizing the impact between investing in the 3 C's versus just rolling out tech. And I think that was when we worked together at Dapper Labs.
Yeah. We worked together. We, you know, Marie brought me on board to support with the change management process. And we developed some really interesting solutions to foster collaboration. And yeah, it sent us on this path that has led us to, you know, presenting on this topic today.
And I appreciate it. I'm glad you guys met. I'm glad we could talk about this. This is an important issue. We do have some questions. I will say this.
Yeah,
Well, I think we're running out of time, but I will do. I honestly, because I think I could talk all day. I think we could all talk on this topic all day. You can reach all of us on social media. We're going to answer those questions probably through email and make sure those are answered. But I just wanted to thank you both for being on here today. Thank you for talking about this topic. I appreciate evangelizing the legal operations role and what it can do for legal departments and law firms. So I wanted to say personally thank you because I really appreciate that. I appreciate the role. So everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your time. I appreciate being invested also into this function, into change management as well. And I hope you have a stellar rest of your week and stellar weekend.
Thank you, everyone.